All right, so now we know how the PCs are setting the table for the election campaign. Let's bring in NDP Leader Andrea Horwath now for a reaction to this. Ms. Horwath, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being here. The interesting element to this budget, of course, is it's not going to be voted on now until after the June 2nd election. How significant of a matter is that for you?
Well, I think it's clear, Nick, that the government had no intention of tabling a budget that we could actually have the time to pore over and debate. They were supposed to table it a month ago, and obviously they didn't want the scrutiny. They didn't want the opposition to pick apart their budget. But it really isn't a budget at this point, is it? It's really an election platform. And the thing that's troubling about it is that it doesn't fix the many things that are broken in our province, and simply ignores some of the things that COVID-19 showed us. We have a healthcare system on its knees. Our seniors care system is really broken, and people are having a hard time making ends meet. People cannot pay the rent. They're having a hard time affording the roof that they have over their heads. And life's gotten worse under Doug Ford. And of course, many of the problems that we have stem from a Liberal government that had 15 years to fix these things, to deal with them. They chose not to. In fact, they broke many of the things that are broken now.
So then how do you plan on sort of cutting through to the electorate and sort of highlighting that? Because if you take a look at other polls in terms of what voters want to see in terms of, the rebuild of Ontario coming out of the pandemic, targeting affordability, targeting housing and those sorts of things, there are elements of that in this budget. Depending on how deep people read into it, you're going to get a different layer of sort of, involvement here. So how will you sort of try to encourage people or educate, it seems, the electorate to what you would like to see or what you would do differently if you're elected on June 2nd?
Well, I think people already realize that Doug Ford says one thing and does another. I mean, let's face it, he only kept about 37% of his promises over the last couple of years, and people were worse off as a result of it. He came in cutting, even though hospitals and healthcare were already on their knees. He privatized more of the long-term care system and continues to do that. And I know Mr. Del Duca is talking a good game now, but they had 15 years to fix long-term care, and they didn't. In fact, they kept privatizing even more of it. And when I talk to folks, they're telling me, and when you look at the polls, they're also telling me that the majority of people don't want to see Doug Ford get a second term. So the question is, how do we stop Doug Ford? At this time, the way to stop Doug Ford is to vote NDP. We have 40 seats. We're the official opposition. Stephen Del Duca's team is not in any shape whatsoever. They have about 7 seats. So people need to come together to be able to stop Doug Ford now in this election. And that's what I'm saying to folks. If you want a new government that's going to fix the things that matter most to people, this time the NDP is your best shot.
Okay, let me ask respectively about what cost that would be, though. This is a pretty big spending budget, almost $200 billion. Deficits running longer than even the Financial Accountability Office was expecting. They thought we'd be sort of balanced or in a surplus within a couple of years from now. If you're elected, then, Ms. Horwath, are you suggesting the New Democrats would then spend more? We've heard about your healthcare fixes, talking about hiring more workers, giving them raises, that sort of thing. What would that then mean to perhaps taxes in the province?
We will not raise taxes on middle and low income families. We've made that commitment. But there's a lot of big corporations that had windfall profits during COVID-19. We're going to ask them to pay their fair share. There are multi-millionaires in this province that can be asked to pay a little bit more. But I want to guarantee the people of Ontario that every day I'm going to go to work, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and make sure the things that they care about most are fixed. And I'm also going to be responsible with the government's finances. And we have a plan, as you identified, that does fix home care, and it does fix long-term care, and it addresses skyrocketing rents and the unaffordability of housing. Doug Ford's plan doesn't do any of those things. And when you look at Mr. Del Duca, he can talk a good game, but he doesn't have the capacity this time around to form a government. So if people want a government that's on their side and that's really going to do the things that they've identified are their most important priorities, then they can certainly choose the NDP, and we will make sure that the things that matter most to them are fixed.
Okay, before I let you go, one thing that's been highlighted by critics in terms of the spending here is the sort of lack of spending or effective drop in spending when it comes to the education portfolio here. Mr. Del Duca addressed it when we spoke to him about an hour ago. I wonder what your take is on how the Ford government is promising to spend money on education and whether you think it's enough or whether more needs to be spent.
Well, in fact, Nick, the Ford government cut $1.3 billion from education this past fiscal year, 21-22. Can you imagine that? At a time when our kids are struggling the most, when our kids were out of school the most, when they're struggling with anxiety and mental health issues and socialization, parents are actually saying that their kids' personalities have changed because of the things they've been dealing with over the last 2 years. And this Ford government cut education by $1.3 billion. And you know what? The rest of the budget includes $2.7 billion going forward in cuts because it's not keeping up with inflation. And those that means that more teachers, more education workers, more frontline healthcare workers are going to be canned by Doug Ford at a time when we need to be rebuilding the services that COVID showed us very clearly need to be fixed.
Okay, well, we just want to let our viewers know we did invite Minister Bethlenfalvy to join us this morning. He was scheduled to be on, but then that was canceled at the last minute. We did speak to Stephen Del Duca and, of course, Andrea Horwath, leader of the NDPs. Appreciate the time this morning. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Nick.